In 1938, life in Bradford, Pennsylvania, moved at a slower pace than the busy world we know today. It was a time before television in every home, before highways cut across the countryside, before the noise of modern life drowned out the simple joys of a small American town. Families in Bradford knew their neighbors. Children played freely in fields, their laughter echoing across the hills. The Great Depression had left its scars, but by 1938 the community was healing, and people held on to traditions that brought them closer together. Among those traditions was Mother's Day, a holiday that gave families the excuse to pause and celebrate the women who held their households together. For the West family, Mother's Day of 1938 was supposed to be just that, a day of love, family, and peace. The Wests were an ordinary family, well respected in Bradford. The father, Shirley, worked hard to provide for his wife and children. His wife, Cecilia, was a loving mother who dedicated her time to the home. They had 3 children, Dorothea, the eldest daughter, Alan, their son, and the youngest, Marjorie, just 4 years old. Marjorie was the kind of child who captured hearts easily. She had big, curious eyes, a soft face framed with curls, and a smile that seemed too big for her small body. At 4 years old, she already had a personality that drew people in. She was playful, spirited, and fearless in the way only small children can be. On May 8, 1938, the West family, together with friends, decided to celebrate Mother's Day with a picnic. They drove into the nearby countryside, heading for a familiar spot near Marshburg, about 8 miles outside Bradford. The area was a natural paradise, rolling hills, thick trees, open meadows dotted with spring wildflowers. The day was bright, the air fresh, the kind of day that makes you believe the world is safe and perfect. The picnic began with laughter, conversation, food, and the comfort of family bonds. The adults spread blankets, unpacked baskets filled with sandwiches, fruit, and homemade pies. The children, as children do, quickly grew restless and wandered off to play. Marjorie and her sister Dorothea spent much of their time picking wildflowers for their mother. Dorothea, being older, took on the role of guide, while Marjorie followed along, her little hands carefully gathering blossoms of purple and yellow. Their mother Cecilia must have watched with quiet pride, seeing her daughters disappear and reappear through the tall grass. Their laughter carried on the breeze. To the family, it was an ordinary, almost perfect afternoon, but the perfection shattered in a single instant. At some point, Dorothea returned to the picnic spot without her little sister. Perhaps she believed Marjorie was right behind her, or maybe she had told her to catch up. But when Dorothea looked back, Marjorie was nowhere in sight. At first, there was no panic. Children wandered all the time. Perhaps she had stopped to tie her shoe, or maybe she had bent down to pick more flowers. Someone called her name, expecting to see her small figure emerge from the field at any moment. But the moment stretched on, and the only sound was the wind. The flowers Marjorie had collected were later found dropped on the ground, as though she had let go in surprise, or been pulled away before she could hold on. That simple image, a little bunch of wildflowers lying abandoned in the grass, would become the lasting symbol of her disappearance. The West searched frantically, their voices rising with urgency. They fanned out across the meadow, into the trees, down to the creek bed. Nothing. Within an hour, other picnickers joined the search. Word spread quickly, and by evening, hundreds of volunteers combed the countryside. Bradford was a small town, and when a child went missing, it wasn't just the family's tragedy, it became the town's tragedy. Fathers left their dinners uneaten, mothers bundled up their children and joined the search parties. Lanterns lit up the night as lines of people swept across fields, calling her name into the darkness. Despite their efforts, there was no trace. Not a sound, not a clue, not a footprint that led them to her. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed Marjorie whole. In the days that followed, the search intensified. Bloodhounds were brought in, their noses trained to follow the faintest scent. They sniffed at Marjorie's clothes, at the flowers she had dropped, and set off through the field. For a while, hope surged as the dogs seemed to follow a trail. But then suddenly the trail went cold. They stopped at a road near the picnic site, circled in confusion, and lay down. To the handlers, this was a chilling sign. It meant Marjorie's scent ended at the road, as though she had been lifted into a car and driven away. The community clung to hope in those first days. Maybe she had simply wandered too far and was hiding. Maybe she was lost in the woods, frightened but alive. Searchers dragged ponds and streams, fearing she might have fallen in. They searched abandoned wells, barns, and cellars. Airplanes were even used to scan the countryside, a rare effort for 1938. Yet every possible lead ended in nothing. As hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the optimism faded. What was left was grief, confusion, and the gnawing suspicion that something far darker had happened. Bradford, like many small towns, was a place where people trusted one another. Strangers were noticed immediately. Theories quickly took hold. Some believed a passing driver had spotted the little girl near the road and taken her. Others thought perhaps someone from the community, someone trusted, had been involved. Police interviewed dozens of people, checked alibis, and followed up on tips. Suspicion fell on a traveling salesman spotted in the area, but nothing tied him to the crime. Another man was rumored to have been lurking nearby, but again no evidence was found. The West family was left in torment. Cecilia was said to have cried daily, clinging to the hope that her little girl would return. Shirley blamed himself, unable to reconcile how a normal family picnic could end in such disaster. Dorothea carried her own burden of guilt, haunted by the thought that she had left her sister behind in those crucial moments. The newspapers splashed Marjorie's face across their pages. A round-faced girl with short curls, smiling as only a child can, stared back from headlines that read, "Child missing near Bradford." Appeals for information spread across the state, then across the country. The public's imagination was captured. How could a little girl vanish in broad daylight, surrounded by family and community, with no trace at all? Leads trickled in, and each one brought a rush of hope, only to collapse into despair. Sightings of a girl matching Marjorie's description came from as far as Ohio and New York. But each time investigators arrived, the lead proved false. Letters arrived at the police station, some from people claiming to know what happened, some from opportunists seeking attention, and others from well-meaning individuals convinced they had the answer. None brought Marjorie back. As years passed, the case grew cold, but the mystery never faded. Some whispered about local suspects who were never charged. Others pointed to darker, more organized explanations. One of the most enduring theories connected Marjorie's disappearance to the notorious Georgia Tan, the woman who ran the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Tan, later exposed as a trafficker of children, kidnapped or purchased thousands of children, and placed them with wealthy families under falsified records. Many children were taken from poor or vulnerable families, but some were outright abducted. Could Marjorie have been one of them? Could she have been whisked away in a car that day, her identity changed, and raised as someone else in a distant city? The theory gained traction decades later, but like so many others, it remained speculation, unproven, forever hanging in the air as a possibility. The Wests never found closure. Cecilia died with the wound of her daughter's disappearance still raw. Shirley carried the burden until his own passing. Dorothea, who lived much longer, often spoke of the memory of her sister, the haunting image of her small figure disappearing into the flowers that day. For her, the guilt and sorrow were lifelong companions. Bradford itself carried the memory too. Generations grew up hearing the story of the little girl who vanished on Mother's Day. The field where she was last seen became more than just a meadow. It became sacred ground, a place where innocence was lost. Even today, locals speak of it with reverence, as though it still holds the echoes of that day. 80 years later, the disappearance of Marjorie West remains unsolved. Theories abound, but the truth is buried under layers of time, silence, and mystery. Did a stranger take her? Did she fall victim to a calculated abduction ring? Or did something else happen? Something so strange and unimaginable that no one has ever uncovered it? The lack of answers is what makes her story so haunting. Marjorie West would be over 90 years old today if she were still alive. Somewhere, perhaps, a woman lived a long life never knowing she was the lost child of Bradford. Or perhaps her life ended that very day in 1938, carried away by someone who left no trace. The question has no answer, and that is what keeps the story alive.